This episode is for the skeptic. If you are the person who has been listening to this podcast while quietly reserving judgment, this one is for you. If you are the husband or the brother or the father or the colleague who has been sent this link by someone who is already convinced and you're not, this one is for you. If you are a medical professional who has stumbled on this podcast and wants to know whether there is any actual science here, this one is also for you. I'm going to spend around 50 minutes on the mechanism. No metaphor, no symbolic anatomy, no poetry. The biology, the research base, and an honest account of what the evidence does and does not yet prove, including where I am working, beyond the evidence, and why. I am Abhinav Sharma, episode 3. Let's get into it. The stress response in plain language. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA, the body's central stress response architecture. And here is how it works. The hypothalamus, a small structure at the base of the brain, monitors the environment for threat. When it detects one, it releases a hormone. Now, hormone is CRH, but we will not get into it. This hormone signals the pituitary gland, which releases another hormone, ACTH, which travels through the bloodstream to the adrenal glands at the top of the kidneys and triggers the release of cortisol. Now, cortisol in an acute situation is one of the most elegant pieces of biological engineering in the human body. It raises blood sugar to fuel the muscles. It suppresses digestion, not a priority when you are running. It temporarily suppresses the immune system because mounting a full immune response in a moment of physical danger is an expensive thing. It sharpens attention and narrows our focus. Now, this system was designed for a world in which threats were real, immediate and finite. You encountered a predator, you ran, or you fought. The predator was gone, cortisol dropped, the system reset. The modern human life, however, does not produce many predators. What it produces in abundance is chronic, low-grade psychological threat. The job might not be there, the relationship that is structurally unhappy but functionally intact, the parent who needs you, the child who needs attention, the self that has been on hold for so long it has stopped asking. Now, these are not finite threats. They do not end. And the HPA axis, designed for acute finite threats, does not have a clean mechanism for chronic, unresolvable threat. It keeps running. But there is a second mechanism that is more specifically relevant to this practice, and I want to be precise about it. When an emotional experience, fear, anger, grief, is fully felt and expressed, the emotional circuit completes. The body processes the experience, the nervous system discharges the activation, cortisol drops, baseline restored. When an emotional experience is felt but suppressed, when the anger is swallowed, when the grief is passed, when the fear is overridden by the need to appear functional, the circuit does not complete. The cortisol gets released, body registered emotional event, but the discharge did not happen because the expression was blocked. Now the hypothalamus will continue to register the stress, the hormones continue, cortisol continues, circulating in a body that is normally safe, doing nothing useful, doing something damaging. Now, year after year, decade after decade, the biochemistry of emergency running in a body, sitting in a meeting. And that is the HPA axis mechanism in plain language. And that is the mechanism I am describing when I talk about suppressed emotions experience having biological downstream effects. Now, the downstream consequence, condition by condition, chronically elevated cortisol is not one problem. It's a cascade of specific measurable disruptions. The autoimmune pathway. In a short-term stress response, cortisol suppresses the immune system. Temporarily, that is appropriate. The body is prioritizing the fight. In the chronic case, the immune system does not simply stay suppressed. It becomes dysregulated. Some functions are chronically dampened. others become hyperactive. The regulatory mechanisms that prevent the immune system from attacking the body's own tissue, the tolerance mechanisms, become unreliable. The immune system loses the capacity to distinguish self from non-self with the precision it needs. And this is the pathway from chronic emotional suppression to autoimmune disease. It's not the only pathway, of course. Genetic predisposition, environmental triggers, and viral events all contribute. But this is also a real measurable research supported pathway. Now I want to talk about the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experience, conducted by CDC and some others in 1990, somewhere in 1990s. I don't remember the exact date. Now it was replicated and extended many times since, and it showed a close response relationship between childhood adversity, what we normally call childhood trauma, and adult autoimmune disease. The more adverse childhood experience, the higher the autoimmune disease rate. A dose-response relationship is the strongest signal available short of a controlled environment. The mechanism is the HPA axis, chronic cortisol activation, immune dysregulation. Coming to the thyroid pathway. Cortisol influences thyroid function at multiple levels. It affects the conversion of T4 to the T3 form. It disrupts the feedback loop between the pituitary and the thyroid. Because Hashimoto's is autoimmune, it inherits the entire immune dysregulation pathway I just described. The biology and the symbolic anatomy coverage at the throat, that is not something I manufactured. It is a pattern that recurs across literature and across clinical practices independent of each other. The insulin and type 2 diabetes pathway, cortisol raises blood sugar. That is one of its primary functions, fueling the muscles for the fight. Now, chronically elevated cortisol will mean chronically elevated blood sugar, which in turn means chronic insulin production. Over time, the cells become less responsive to insulin, which is called insulin resistance. The pancreas compensates by producing more, and that is the metabolic pathway to type 2 diabetes. So cortisol induced insulin resistance is in every endocrinology textbook. Link between chronic stress and type 2 diabetes is one of the most established findings in psychosomatic research. Now coming to the systemic inflammation. Chronically elevated cortisol eventually produces a resistance in which the cells stop responding to cortisol's anti-inflammatory signals. The mechanism fails and chronic systemic low-grade inflammation comes up. Now this is also implicated in virtually every chronic disease, whether it be cardiovascular, metabolic, autoimmune, neurodegenerative. It is also the biological state that most correlates with the subjective experience my clients consistently describe when they first arrive. Typical managing, not healing. Something is off, but nobody can find it. Now that experience has a biological correlate. Basically chronic low-grade inflammation, which has a mechanism, and that mechanism runs through the emotional life. What the evidence shows and where I'm being precise about its limits. Now let me be honest about the evidence, because intellectual honesty about evidence is what separates this from the wellness industry that claims everything and proves nothing. I just described the HPA axis biology. It's established in the science. There is no serious scientific disagreement about whether chronic cortisol dysregulation affects your immune function or your thyroid or your metabolic function. That is not disputed. The specific claim that emotional suppression of particular emotional experience produces particular disease outcome, now that is where the research is strong but not as clean. The studies and its replications, Gabor Mate's clinical documentation, decades of work on allostatic load, the cumulative biological cost of chronic stress. Now taken together, they do make a compelling case. To be frank, most of this research is correlational rather than experimental. I mean, you cannot ethically randomize people to suppressive childhoods to test the hypothesis in a controlled trial. The evidence is there, epidemiological, clinical, and mechanistic. But Of course, it's not the same as pharmaceutical evidence. Now, I want you to hold both of those things at once. Strong case and not a closed case. Coming to Bach Flower Remedies specifically. Now, the research base is of course thin by pharmaceutical standards. Now, there are small scale positive trials and a number of null results also, but I don't use them because the research compels me. I use them because in practice, consistently, they have seen to shift patterns that insight alone has not shifted. That is observation. It is not proof of mechanism. I am distinguishing between the two, and I would rather you knew the distinction. Now, why does your doctor not discuss this? 3 reasons. Time. The consultation is 4 to 5 minutes. Training. Psychoneuroimmunology entered medical curriculum after most of the currently practicing doctors completed their training. And structure. Medicine is organized around the organ system. Nobody in the structure is allocated to the layer underneath all the organ systems. Now, it is easy to say that it's a conspiracy, but it's not. That's maybe a design problem. The wellness industry itself does not solve this problem. It simply falls back to the opposite direction. Takes a real phenomenon and strips it of the mechanism, the nuances, and the rigor, replacing them with magical thinking that serves the product catalog. The narrow middle where I work is that the emotional life produces measurable, specific biological issues via real mechanisms. Now, that disruption is addressable through precise, structured patient work. Work is slow, but it is specific. It is supported by the best evidence currently available, and it's not magic. If you came in skeptical and you are leaving less so, good. That is all I was asking for. This week's question is for the body and not the mind. Somewhere in your body right now, there's a place that is holding something. Not because something is medically wrong there, because something has been living there for a long time. Put your hand there. Can be anywhere. Not to fix it, but just to acknowledge that you know it is there. And let me tell you, the body responds immediately to being acknowledged, even before any words have been formed. Next, we talk about autoimmunity, the shared pattern underneath all autoimmune conditions and the specific signatures of 6 conditions. Thank you for patiently listening and being here. I'll see you next time.